From the way that Olympic gymnast Simone Biles is being praised this week, you might think that the decorated superstar put on a heroic display during the team competition in Tokyo yesterday and led her squad to a gold medal. Many prominent politicians like Ayanna Pressley and Cori Bush and many others have made public statements applauding her. The White House press secretary expressed gratitude and support, said we all should express gratitude and support for Simone Biles. Deadspin gushed over what they call the most impressive move of her career. Former Olympians joined in the group hug. Many athletes came out to support her. Articles have been written extolling her bravery, declaring that her achievements this week have sent a, quote, powerful message to the world. CNN called her performance impactful. The New Yorker described her, quote, radical courage. The New York Times talked about her champion mindset. She's been hailed for her strength and for setting an amazing example, being a great athlete, a great role model, all based on what she did yesterday. Women's advocacy groups have come to her defense, have thanked her for all that she's done. It has been perhaps the most effusive praise that has ever been heaped on a quitter. And that's what Simone Biles did to earn this exuberant applause. After all, she gave up. After struggling in the qualifying rounds and botching the first event in the women's team finals, Biles decided to withdraw from the meet. The best gymnast on the squad, the leader, one of the most celebrated U.S. Olympic athletes of all time, chose to abandon her team in the middle of the finals. Her teammates would finish second behind Russia, while Biles went on to receive even more acclaim than a gold medal would have earned her, probably. Now, there was some talk early on suggesting that Biles had been physically injured, but that was not the case. Biles has since explained that she left the competition in order to focus on her mental health and her, quote, mindfulness. She complained that the Olympics haven't been fun this year. She said, quote, this Olympic Games, I wanted it to be for myself when I came in, and I felt like I was still doing it for other people. Returning to this theme later, she said that it's important to put mental health first, because if you don't, then you're not going to enjoy your sport. She complained about the pressure that she's been under. Here's a little more from Biles herself explaining why she quit. Here she is.
And it's been really stressful, this Olympic Games. I think just as a whole, not having an audience, there are a lot of different variables going into it. It's been a long week. It's been a long Olympic process. It's been a long year. So just a lot of different variables. And I think we're just a little bit too stressed out. But we should be out here having fun. And sometimes that's not the case. I just felt like it would be a little bit better to take a back seat, work on my mindfulness, and I knew that the girls would do an absolutely great job, and I didn't want to risk the team a medal for kind of my screw-ups because they've worked way too hard for that. So I just decided that those girls need to go in and do the rest of the competition. Yeah, I say put mental health first, because if you don't, then you're not going to enjoy your sport and you're not going to succeed as much as you want to. So it's okay sometimes to even sit out the big competitions to focus on yourself, because it shows how strong of a competitor and person that you really are.
Now, the people who wish to make excuses for her have offered all kinds of rationales that Biles herself has not offered. There have been lots of people online talking about, for example, her sexual assault and speculating that somehow that might have contributed to this. But she has not once cited that as a reason for her decision. And frankly, it seems pretty disgusting to inject that into this discussion in hopes of bailing her out when she has not brought it up. There are others saying that she was essentially mentally incapacitated to the point that she physically couldn't perform the moves. But again, that's not really what she's saying. You can listen to what she's saying. She has talked more broadly about her mental health, mentioned multiple times that she wasn't having fun, and said, again, multiple times that she needed to focus on herself. That's what she said. Those are her words. She explained why she did this. We don't need to theorize about it. She told us. Now, the question is whether those are good reasons. They aren't. Now, on one hand, there's nothing terribly surprising about the reasons that she gave for quitting. People quit things all the time, and they almost always do it because the thing they're quitting is difficult and not very fun, and they're afraid of failing. This is the universal rationale of all quitters everywhere for all time. I have quit things myself for that reason. You have quit things for that reason. Everyone has, with no exceptions. In this case, there's no doubt that the difficult thing was very difficult indeed. The pressure she experiences as a world-famous athlete on a global stage must be quite burdensome on both an emotional and physical level. And that's what makes quitting understandable. The one thing that it cannot be is admirable. Now, if Simone Biles, here's the point, okay? And I want everyone to try to understand this, because a lot of people don't, apparently. It's a very simple point. If Simone Biles had bailed on her team, as she did, and apologized after the fact, instead of saying, well, I need to focus on myself and hey, they can handle it. If she had bailed on her team, apologized after the fact, and the public had reacted in an appropriately sort of bummed out kind of way to the news, then there wouldn't be much else to say on the matter. It's hard to compete in the Olympics. It's hard to live up to high expectations. Lots of people quit things when they're hard. Again, we all have at one time or another. That's why when someone quits, we normally shake our heads and say, well, that's a shame. And then we move on with our lives. Nobody's suggesting that athletes who quit ought to be tarred and feathered in the street. They might do that in China, maybe, but we're not saying that for here. I'm not advocating that we put them in the stockades in the middle of the town square and throw tomatoes at them. That's not the point. It's enough to be disappointed and be done with it. In fact, if that's how this had played out, if she had quit, everyone was disappointed, she apologized, I wouldn't be saying a word about it. I wouldn't care personally. I wouldn't be talking about it. The problem is that now we are exhorted not simply to understand why someone quits, but to actively applaud them for doing it. What makes the Simone Biles story troubling is not that the women's gymnastic team had to settle for a silver medal, but that our cultural powers that be want us to celebrate cowardice. As always, it's not enough to merely tolerate another person's decision or to be compassionate towards their struggles. We are meant now to rise to our feet and joyously cheer what all people through history and most people living in the world today would consider shameful and unfortunate, at least. It's radical courage is the phrase being used to describe this. Not understandable, okay? Not something we should sympathize with, but radically courageous to leave your team in the lurch. It's one thing to say, Simone Biles quit, but let's have some empathy. If that was the message, I would say, sure, yeah, sounds good. It is quite another to say, Simone Biles quit, isn't that so brave? No, it's not. It is the definition of not brave. It may be human, it may be relatable, but it's the opposite of brave. To be brave is to refuse to quit precisely when most people would. That's why we admire people who persevere, because they are rare. Quitters are a dime a dozen. Cowardice is in no short supply in our world, and it'll become even more common now that we've rebranded it as courage. If we will grant to cowardice the rewards of courage without any of the effort and sacrifice it requires, why bother with courage at all? The many defenders of Simone Biles have said that she's right, a role model, in fact, for prioritizing her mental health above all else. In the era of the psychological man, when there's nothing more important than the self's opinion of itself, it is perhaps no surprise that we should congratulate a woman for explicitly putting herself before her team and her country. I had to put myself first. She says that exactly, explicitly. Now we are celebrating athletes who do that. It used to be the exact opposite. That's not why you compete in a team sport. That's not why you go to the Olympics for your country. If you want to focus on yourself, you don't go. You don't join the team. Nobody is walking up to someone sitting on a park bench and saying, why aren't you in the Olympics right now, you selfish bastard? No, because it's not a requirement. But if you are taking on that responsibility, then you're not supposed to put yourself first. That is the duty, the responsibility that you have assumed for yourself. Oh, but mental health, right? You're not allowed to say any of this, no, because the magic phrase, the magic term, the get out of jail free card, mental health has been used. That is now the shield meant to insulate us from all criticism. Oh, you think you can criticize me for a decision I made? Well, you can't, because it helped my mental health. The highest virtue now is the pursuit of your own mental well-being. Courage is now the avoidance of mental anguish, which is to say that courage is now the exact opposite of what it has always been and what it actually is still now today. And yet still, you have to wonder how consistently the new moral code would even be applied. Would Tom Brady receive such a worshipful reaction if he left in the third quarter of a playoff game because he wasn't having fun and needed to work on his mindfulness? Can you imagine that? You can't. It's unthinkable because it would never happen. Never has happened. You can't imagine Tom Brady in the third quarter of a playoff game, or really this is the Super Bowl. This is the Super Bowl for this sport. I mean, more than the Super Bowl, because this happens only once every 4 years as opposed to the Super Bowl, which happens every year, especially if you're Tom Brady and you've been in like 10 of them. But you can't imagine Tom Brady, third quarter of the Super Bowl, going to his coach and saying, I got to sit out. What do you mean you got to sit? Are you injured? No. I got to get him. I'm not in the right headspace right now, and I got to work on myself. Nobody would accept that. Sure, there have been cases of sulking professional athletes leaving the field or the court a few seconds early because they were frustrated and sad during a bad loss. We've seen this move from LeBron James, for example, perhaps the greatest sulker in all of sports. There are usually a few people willing to defend this kind of behavior from male athletes, but they've never been celebrated like a returning war hero the way Simone Biles has been, and Naomi Osaka before her. In fact, I was arguing this point with a sports writer on Twitter last night, and he, in an attempt to defend Biles, brought up the fact that Scottie Pippen, former Chicago Bulls player, in the 1994 NBA playoffs, sat out the final seconds of the game because he was mad that he wasn't going to get the ball. See that the guy was saying to me, what he was saying to me is, here's an example of a male athlete quitting on his team. Well, yeah, it is a very different situation. I mean, in this case, he was mad that he wasn't giving it. He wanted the pressure on him, and he wasn't getting it, and so he was mad and he quit. But he did quit on his team. That's true. But what happened to Scottie Pippen? He was universally reviled for that. Everyone, everywhere, criticized him. To this day, he is criticized, and for good reason. I've never heard anyone call him brave or congratulate him for prioritizing his mental health. This is a privilege reserved only for female athletes at present. That might change, though. Maybe one day we'll celebrate both male and female quitters. Maybe we're fast approaching a time when the greatest athletes will be those who manage to feel the best about themselves while competing. At that point, we won't need it to perform. They won't need to perform any athletic feats at all. They can just, every sport will be them sitting in a circle and whispering sweet nothings to themselves. Everyone wins in the end. May not make for much of a spectator sport, but at least we will know that nobody's mental health has been damaged. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.